this. Starting now. First, we offer some interpretation. Restriction means limits on numbers or types of people who can enter. According to Title 18, the restrictions have two barriers. First, there are quantitative restrictions, quotas, which limit the number of people who can come. Second, there are qualitative restrictions. People that Congress deemed should not be allowed here due to reasons ranging from criminal conviction and health problems. Condition 1 is status quo, where international law is failing. Without the right to exclude, global blocs like UNHCR are in charge of refugee problem will have the right to distribute the refugees without considering whether the countries are willing to accept, which leads to abusive use of power. The status quo of treating restrictions as an obstacle is flawed because the power to deny is critical. Just the United Nations is not innocent. Peter Sutherland, who serves the UN Special Representative of Secretary General, says that he will ask the government to recognize that sovereignty is a mere illusion, and that his plan treats national borders as obstacles. And according to UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, the people must be governed by the EU, or as he calls it, Parliament of Humanity. Already the UNHCR decides which refugee will be settled, where today refugee restrictions allow a country to say no when UNHCR decisions are unfair and abusive. In the Cons War, the country has no voice. Impact is allowing military force against sovereignty, facilitated by further empowerment region blocs like EU. If we deem refugee restriction impermissible, we are swaying in favor of a globalist reign whose plans, like New Marshall Plan, will allow EU military force to intervene in European nations even without permission from national authorities. The force would have also the power to commandeer national governments' resources. Indeed, as Newman explains, the EU Empowerment Agenda is a new agency with the power to resettle refugees in the EU members against their will. Contention 2 is backlash. Without restriction, it's crucial to protect national sovereignty. Refugee influx will create excellent opportunity for right-wing populist parties to exploit a social reaction, creating hostile environment that radicalize refugees as well as local civilians. Successful assimilation of refugees doesn't happen if a huge influx is taken. Inter-civilizational clashes cannot be alleviated. According to Baiman 15, that radicalized Europeans will transform a community into a more violent one, since many Muslims are alienated from governments and societies. It's the chance for radicals to provide religious, educational, and social support for refugees, creating problems where non-existent. If they cannot be integrated, then anger and dissatisfaction will fester, creating communities that allow terrorists to recruit and operate security risks. People has already felt resentment and frustration about existing open border policies. According to Baiman 18, the most liberal democratic parties no longer have a convincing ideology, a convincing discourse, and as a consequence, they are perceived as not capable of handling challenges. And we can prove that because votes for populist parties have surged from 7% to more than 25%. The parties that are succeeded in influencing policy even when they are not in the government, such as Britain's UKIP, the Danish People's Party, AFD, dragging into sports. Impact is extreme populists thus seek opportunity to rally support and secure power, and thus radicalize more people. And they will legitimize policy which now challenge endangered democracy, freedom of media, freedom of opinion, freedom of course. I'm pointing at refugees. This is also dangerous for the economy because they adopt protectionist economy policies which have three impacts. A, anti-globalization policy become inflationary as imported goods become more expensive. B, domestic labor markets will be shielded and thus hurting risk assets. C, government will likely save less. So countries benefited from the current account surpluses are particularly at risk if the anti-globalizational trend takes root. What we should do instead is that we put those we fund the resettlement programs in the developed countries where there are more. We have better opportunity to put them in the developed countries. Where they can provide 200,000 jobs a year in Jordan alone, according to our McKinsey 70 card, and plus, because of cultural similarity and the similarity of economic structures, they will not turn down their economies because they will no downturn pressure on wages, and thus they can assimilate more easily. And thus, we strongly urge a program.
Now, good afternoon, distinguished judges and fellow debaters. We stand in strong negation of today's resolution. Resolve on balance, refugee restrictions in developed countries are permissible. Definitions: permissible. As a point to technology and value by Christian Schrader, French, and Laura Westcott, permissible is defined as right, including under that category of what is obligatory. A right act is an act that is permissible for you to do, and a wrong act is an act you have an obligation or a duty to refrain from doing. In this case, permissible is defined to be something that is morally right. Now for our framework. Since this is a debate surrounding whether or not refugee restrictions are permissible, we only need to prove that said restrictions are morally wrong. We do not have the burden to defend any other type of policy, whilst the pro team has to defend that refugee restrictions are morally correct. If they fail to do so, we should win this debate. Contention 1, global responsibility. Since the 19th century, developed countries have been laying the foundation for the current conflict. Subpoint A, border drawing. The tragedy of the current refugee situation can be traced back all the way to when the scramble for Africa reached its peak with the Berlin Conference. As according to Akagumi from Nanshan State University in Nigeria, he sees that conference as the crucible for future inter-African conflicts. Quoting, "The foundation for present-day crises in Africa was laid by the 1884-85 Berlin Conference. The Middle East faced the same fate. As Nicholas Blanford writes in 2016, the blunt proposal to divide the Middle East to British and French forces offered by Sir Sykes in 1915 will lead to a few years later the birth of the modern Middle East, and with it, decades of political turmoil, wars, sectarian bloodlines, socio-economic disparities, and the abominable Arab-Israel conflict." Subpoint B, resource exploitation. Africa proves this point. As Curtis and Jones writes in 2017, Africa is not poor. While so many people in African countries live in poverty, the continent has considerable wealth. The key problem is that the rest of the world, and particularly Western countries, are extracting far more than they send back. Subpoint C, arms trade. Durgan writes in 2019 that the race to sell arms to the Middle East between the US and Russia has become more important for both powers than resolving the region's conflicts. As a result, prospects for ending wars are declining, with odds of further destabilization in the region increasing at the same time. And subpoint D, sanctions. Patrick Cockburn, an award-winning independent columnist, explains in 2016 that the US and EU sanctions are contributing to the humanitarian calamity in Syria, whilst Mr. Assad remains firmly in power. The situation resembles that in Iraq between 1990 and 2003, when sanctions destroyed the Iraqi economy and dissolved its society while doing nothing to reduce the power of Saddam Hussein. Many argue that the mass impoverishment they produced contributed significantly to the political and sectarian breakdown after the invasion of 2003. The 4 points above have proven conclusively that developed countries have an irrefutable responsibility for the turmoil in the Africa and the Middle East, and it should be their duty to take care of what they caused. However, as according to Cohen in 2016, neighboring states in the Middle East have absorbed the vast majority of refugees fleeing atrocities in Syria and Iraq, and this disproportionate burden on the states in the region is in line with global trends in the distribution of refugees, proving how developed countries are not taking up their duty as they need to, and why current restrictions are absolutely not permissible. Contention 2, human rights. Article 2 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states that everyone is entitled to all the rights and freedoms set forth in this declaration without distinction of any kind on the basis of political, jurisdictional, or international status of the country or territory to which a person belongs, whether it be independent, trust, non-self-governing, or under any limitation of sovereignty. This, however, is not so true, and one clear exception is the Family Separation Act, which was announced on May 7, 2018 by Jeff Sessions. According to the ACLU, the government has since then provided the court with data that indicates at least 2,654 children have been separated from their parents and caregivers as a result of Trump administration policies. These policies have had great impact on the children in both the long term and the short term. As according to Shayar, in the short term, children exhibit a loss of appetite, difficulty sleeping, regressive behaviors, physical symptoms such as stomach aches and detachments, all common signs of PTSD in young children. And in the long term, it can have negative impacts on both the emotional and physical health and well-being of separated parents and children. And thus, because of the 2 points above, we firmly and proudly negate today's resolution. Thank you.
Okay, so what are the words of your first contention about the imperialism?
It's not about imperialism, it's saying how countries have a global responsibility towards developing countries, and we have 4 warrants. Number 1, we talk about how developed countries have caused the turmoil in both the Middle East and Africa through border drawing. They drew up the borders 120 years ago in Africa, and they drew up the borders in the Middle East about 100 years ago in 1915. And then our second warrant talks about resource exploitation, which is proven by Africa. And our source explicitly means that Africa is not poor, and while so many people in African countries live in poverty, it's because Western countries, particularly developed countries, Western countries, are stealing Africa's wealth and leaving them in destitution. And then our third point talks about arms trade, which is basically how powers like the United States and Russia are focusing more on selling arms in their own arms race than solving problems in the regions such as the Middle East. They believe in more like outracing each other and selling arms and killing more people than resolving conflicts and stopping the flow of refugees. And then the fourth point, I'm not done. Fourth point, we talk about sanctions, where the US and EU are putting sanctions upon countries in the Middle East or in Africa, and that is worsening humanitarian crises in those areas, causing more refugees, more poverty, more destitution, and all of the above. We believe that they have a great responsibility.
Okay, so
Can I have a question? Okay, sure. So you talk about resettlement in your contention, how that is an alternative.
My alternative.
Sorry, I have a question, so I just made that to clarify. So can you tell me why that proves that restrictions are permissible?
So basically it's that. So what we're saying is that countries have the right to exclude, right? That's the
I'm just asking about
Yeah,
why
yeah,
does
just
your
let me
alternative?
finish.
Sure.
Yeah, country has the right to exclude, but that doesn't mean we are not taking up the moral responsibility. The way that we are taking the responsibility is by adopting another way, like to ease the crisis, right? According to our McKinsey cards, donating to Jordan's refugee program.
Yeah, I get the point. Okay, so the problem is you didn't answer my question. I'm asking you, how does an alternative prove that refugee restrictions are permissible? Like, how does an alternative?
Yeah,
basically, your logic is saying that this is okay, so that is also okay.
It's like this. It takes away our burden of moral responsibility, right? Because but actually is that what you're saying is that because we have the moral obligation, so that we should not set any restrictions. But what I'm saying is that we do not need to tear down our borders to fulfill that moral obligation because we have another way to do
Alright,
that.
so follow up. Two things. Number one, we're not saying that we're going to support open borders. We're not saying we should tear down all borders. The only thing we're saying in this debate is that restrictions are impermissible, that current restrictions are impermissible. So you can't say that all of our evidence is saying that we should open borders. All of our evidence in our speech is proving to you the fact that current restrictions are impermissible. That fact is proven. And then you also, you still really didn't answer my question because all you're saying is that your evidence about resettlement proves that it shouldn't have open borders. Thank you.
I call for 30 seconds of reference. Judges ready? Opponents ready? 4 minutes starting now. First, offer the interpretation of the topic. Con is burden to prove why restrictions are permissible. So, at least what we are saying, there are two kinds of restrictions. The first restriction is quantitative, which is imposed by quota, and second is qualitative. At least the developed countries have to know what are the people going into a country, namely their medical screening, whether they are susceptible to disease like Ebola, and second, whether they have criminal records. At least we have to ensure the security of these countries. So essentially the first contention, my rebuttal will be I have two responses to that. The first, their premise on this argument is that West has caused so many problems in the Middle East, right? So essentially caused a refugee crisis in the first place. However, two responses. So first, West expansion does have positive benefits, and we're done with good intentions. You can't blame the West for everything. Everything has costs and benefits. However, you can't simply blame that they have such responsibility solely because of their negative effects. This is a point in yellow with 17 card. Basically, it says that demographic countries rarely go to war with each other or prey on their neighbors. So basically, through the way of introducing democratic policies on their way, in the long term, they're reaching a stability. However, in the short run, this instability costs. In the long run, they will benefit. However, B, developed countries are taking up responsibilities. They have to answer why specifically developed countries are burdened to solve a problem. We tell you we have the responsibility to solve a problem, not through opening our borders, however, through funding, existing funding, through UNHCR namely, and other humanitarian corridors to ensure that refugees can settle in developing countries. So essentially, the argument goes to also out of 18 card. Basically says the U.S. and Migration Refugee Assistance Program is doing the right job what we are talking about. So essentially, why we have to send them into developing countries? Several points. So first, even if we buy the humanitarian impact, these refugees are facing human rights violations in developed countries for several reasons. First, cultural differences. First, cultural differences. So basically, the refugees are mostly Muslims and African people. So in the Western world, they can't find jobs or can't live in the local community because of the inherent discrimination that cannot be solved by policy, namely the Muslims' view on women and individual rights. And that's how this causes discrimination and all these problems. They face human rights violations in developed countries. However, they don't face such thing in developing countries because, first of all, developing countries rely on agriculture and manufacture more. So they need low-skilled labor, while developed countries don't. So the local community, the developed countries rely on importation of goods and services that's manufactured from other countries. However, in developing countries, they need more workers working in the agriculture and manufacturing sectors. It's essentially our card that basically says the causes 67.4% of the wage decrease per month in developed countries. However, in developing countries, they embrace these workers. This is essentially, according to my partner mentioned, according to our card, basically says in developing countries, every year they're welcoming 200,000 refugees solely on this sector in this one country alone. Why specifically developed countries? We say in developing countries, we fulfill the human right because they are not susceptible to human trafficking and all sorts of problems because they don't face discrimination, yet they also provide all the education and training and expertise, so the existing plans work. And also, resettle in neighboring countries are more cost effective. It's 12 times more cost effective according to Cameron PhD 15, essentially because when refugees, they have to go to developed countries, that's a long way to travel, right? And also that the cost will be a huge burden on the taxpayers' money, yet there's no actual revenue. We say the wage downturn, and also that collapse of the development in developed countries, essentially they rely on higher wage sector. However, this down wage impact in developed country would be that people will be unable to afford for the funds and for the house loan. This essentially will cause the 2008 financial crisis about the subprime mortgages because the people are unqualified to earn jobs. However, in developing countries, they don't suffer that flaw because the wages are generally equal. So this income inequality essentially will result in developed countries, but doesn't exist in developing countries. And that's why we say in developing countries, this is essentially better. And that's what we strongly urge a pro-ballot.
Thank you.
Crossfire?
No.
Oh, sorry.
Looking for that first. Guys, because then we do crossfire. So, judges ready? Opponents ready? Ready?
Yeah.
Cool. So let my speech begin now. Before I start my rebuttal, I would like to restate our framework. Our framework basically says that since this debate is surrounding whether or not refugee restrictions are permissible, the con only needs to prove that restrictions are morally wrong. However, we do not have to prove the burden to defend it or other policies such as our opponents' developing countries or SEZ zones. Now, continue. If the pro team fails to prove that restrictions are morally right, we shall win this debate. Moving on, the first contention was about how the refugee restrictions are basically immoral. No, refugee restrictions are basically national sovereignty. So countries have the right to do this. However, we have 4 points to say in response. Having the right does not mean that they have the moral responsibility to do so. So first of all, one person has the right to lay at home and eat chips until they die, but they do not have the responsibility to do so. They have to go out to work for their family, for their friends, for people who love them, and for people who care about them. Second of all, having the right to do something does not mean it's morally right to do something. Maybe you have the right to do something, but you should not do it due to moral values, which is a very important factor in this debate. Thirdly, the the Declaration of Human Rights states that everyone is entitled to the rights of freedom and set forth in this declaration without distinction of any kind, including any limitation of sovereignty. This law states that this thing, human rights, is more important than sovereignty and thus should overweight national sovereignty. Fourth, when the states agreed to sign the UNHCR, they already gave up part of their sovereignty, thus the sovereignty argument is irrelevant. According to the treaty and sovereignty, tension exists between efforts to advance global human rights and concerns about effective sovereignty. International human rights norms internationalize what is used to be a state's internal affairs. Once states consent to their treaties, they agree to internalize the subject matter that's covered by this treaty. Discussion by the outsiders is always permitted. Other international actions may be allowed depending on the wording of the treaty. Moving on, the second condition talks about backlashes and politics. Now, first we want to point out that this thing is mostly due to the right-wing parties. Take America for an example. Donald Trump is actually the one to blame. Steve Knight's actions in 2018 says that there are actions in the border, that restrictions are taking place around the world that would not be taking place without this influence of Donald Trump's mission. Eric Sweden, the president of Refugee International, says this himself. Also, esteemed professor of economics, University of March in 2017, direct exposure to refugees without interaction seems to be further increase the support for freedom parties. In other words, if you don't let refugees in the problem, in the country is not a way to solve the problems. You have to realize how beneficial refugees are. You have to make those right-wing parties realize how refugees are actually humans. You have to make them realize what they can do to the economy, and you have to make them realize why they are and should not be threats to the country. Moving on. Third, they talk about alternative plans, like I said in the beginning, about how developing countries and special economic zones. First of all, to the special economic zones, they actually exploit refugees. For example, as Hertati and Susan Chucky found, as the special economic zones have in fact negative effects on working and living conditions due to the high use of contract labor and low wage paid to the workers, which is insufficient to meet their living expenses. And secondly, special economic zones don't solve the refugee problems. According to Cherry again, with the little serious discussion for human rights, Becky and Polly recommendation for special economy zones effectively removing rich countries' international obligation and legitimize narratives that position refugees as undeserving. And third of all, these are irrelevant, like my partner has said. Adding something to another thing, in this case refugee restrictions, does not make refugee restrictions correct, they just make you think it's correct. And thank you, that's my speech. Yes, awesome.
3 minutes.
Now.
Okay, so basically you mentioned we have to make these refugees live like a human right? So how do you ensure the human right is sustained in developed countries of these refugees?
Well, I don't, first of all, I'm not saying yes, I am saying they should have absolute human rights. I'm just saying that keeping them outside of the country is actually violating. So first, we both agree, should we both agree that keeping a refugee out there to die, to have an instantaneous bullet in their head is violating human rights? Do we agree on this?
No, because first of all, for the sake of refugees their own, if we accept these refugees into developed countries, it's irresponsible for these refugees because we aren't telling them what backlash they're seeing, right? The right-wing populist party assuming power. If they are kept in developing countries, essentially, they will have better opportunities and less cultural difference and less discrimination to face. So essentially, they need more labor. Developing countries are more desperate about refugees. So we are the side that actually think about the benefits of refugees for their own sake.
Can I interrupt?
Go ahead.
Are you done? Cool. So first of all, you talk about alternative plans. We're going to push that to the side. I'm going to ask you about that later. First of all, should we agree on having someone there just to die is a violation of human rights? Do you agree on this?
Because we're not leaving them to die. It's not a relevant question. So first of all, it's not a counter plan. It's not an alternative.
I'm sorry, you did not get my question.
Okay, go ahead.
What I'm basically saying is that, first of all, developed countries have the responsibility and should accept refugees due to more.
Yes, so they should fund the developing countries to help these refugees instead. And humanitarian corridors in developing countries are currently working, and this is a status quo instead of a plan, whatever.
Okay, listen. Leaving refugees to go to developing countries is an alternative plan. Our resolution says refugee restrictions in developed countries. You claim that you could have refugees go to developing countries, which is an alternative plan.
As I said, it's not.
Can I finish my sentence?
Go ahead.
Okay, so having this alternative plan is actually irrelevant. Having this alternative plan proves maybe you guys are doing moral actions. However, it does not prove that refugee restrictions are moral. Do you understand this point?
First of all, it's not a plan. It is a status quo. Because now 85% of the refugees are settled in developing countries, and we see them living better than before in development countries.
You're just
No, I mean, this is a status quo. You're essentially saying I'm proposing a counter plan. However, this is not a counter plan alternative because this is a status quo. This is a factual evidence proving that developing countries are looking forward to accept more refugees, and they are accepting right now. And essentially what we're saying is that developed countries, if they fund such programs, it's more cost efficient for the sake of refugees themselves and developed countries. So this is our main argument.
No, that's not what the resolution is talking about.
So what's the
resolution
talking
is
about?
the restrictions, not restrictions
Yes, so
in developed countries, and thus you cannot provide alternative
So we say restriction is justified.
Listen, let me finish. To go to special economic zones for developing countries because that is irrelevant. And I think time is up. Thank you.
We cover 20 seconds of that.
30 seconds. 30 seconds.
What?
Minimum of 30 seconds.
Minimum 30 seconds at this level.
Oh, okay, 30 seconds. So.
Time's up. Time.
2 minutes starting now. So this debate is down to two basic arguments. The first is that the discrimination. The second is economy. Okay, first discrimination. What we are saying here, if refugees get into developed countries, if the huge influx is taken in developed countries, that is creating an excellent justification for Donald Trump and other right-wing populist parties. That is what makes refugees unique. Is that right-wing populist party? Yes, they exist for a long period of time, but why they are gaining power now? Because of refugee crisis. Because they are exploiting the xenophobia tendency inside the people's heart, because there's no such restrictions. And as we mentioned in our first contention, it's about the status quo, is that when UN actions that is forcing countries to make actions that is becoming abusive, the country have the right to reject that. The country have the right to manage its own domestic affairs. And what the right-wing populists bring is that they will endanger democracy. They will bring more. There will be more discrimination, and they will endanger democracy and freedom of opinion, freedom of media, freedom of work. Basically, they will make refugees worse off in that sense. Okay. The second is about labor market distortion. So basically, refugees are basically most of them are low-skilled labor, and when they are pouring into developed countries' economy, because the structure of a developed country economy is stable, because it has a stable middle class workers. So basically, when the low-skilled labor flux in, they will drive down the wages. So they will drive down the wages. So the already existing low-skilled labor in the developed countries, they are worse off. They face 67.8% of wage decrease in the developed countries if their huge influx of refugees are taking in. So basically, they will collapse the economy in developed countries because in wage inequality. And as my partner explained in his rebuttal speech, that will bring economic recession and making everyone in developed countries worse off. And furthermore, that will collapse the whole global economy. Just one example is that 2008 economic recession, and that will bring such harm to the economy. So basically, you should not do that for these two reasons. Thank you.
Oh, no, they've got a minute and 30.
They have,
Use
they use 30 seconds.
before the rebuttal.
They have 1 minute and 30 seconds left.
Yeah, we'll use 30 seconds.
They use 30 seconds.
Yeah, we'll use 30 seconds. I'll use 30 seconds.
How much you use?
30. Yeah, 30. Josh ready? Opponents?
Yeah.
My time starts now. So first off, I'd like to go back to our framework and restate why in this debate we do not have to defend any other policy. Now go back to definitions. Since this is a debate surrounding whether or not refugee restrictions are permissible, we only need to prove that said restrictions are morally wrong. That's the only thing that we have to prove in this debate. We do not have the burden to defend any other policy, which is what the pro team has been pushing us to do throughout this entire debate, pushing us to defend open borders. I'm going to tell you, Judge, that remember, this debate is about one question, and that question is whether or not refugee restrictions are permissible. The pro side says yes, they are. The con side says no, they are not. There's nothing beyond that. We don't have to defend open borders. We don't have to defend any other policy. Now, with that in mind, let's move on to our two contentions and their responses to the rebuttal speech. So first off, global responsibility. They respond 2 points here. Number one, they see how Western expansion has actually had good intentions and only resulted in bad results. However, we like to say that if you think that countries going into ruin, drawing up borders for another continent